Bond had been away for a while, so when he returned in 1995, there was a new energy thanks to a new director and a new actor, and a new boss, new moneypenny, new studio, new producers. But the headline was James Bond was back in GoldenEye.
That's the trouble with the world today. No one takes the time to do a really sinister interrogation anymore.
Pierce Brosnan was the new 007 in the first Bond film set after the end of the Cold War, and it's a film that sets out to counter increasing criticisms of Bond cliches by addressing them head-on while still having fun.
So you destroy every vehicle you get into?
Standard operating procedure.
It's a Bond film that manages to have its cake and eat it too. Thanks, now I want cake. GoldenEye tells a traditional Bond tale of a villain's grand scheme in a world that was vastly different from the time Ian Fleming first conceived of the character in the 1950s. The lifting of the Iron Curtain, women speaking.
With a twist.
Cars with 5 forward gears.
5 forward gears.
Samplers. And of course, computers. The last James Bond film, License to Kill, had not performed well in the US on its 1989 release, but that was merely a hiccup. A start had been made on a third film to star Timothy Dalton, but was knocked off course not by a team of oilmen led by Bruce Willis, but by legal disputes. Basically, the owner of United Artists, MGM, was nearly bought out by one company who couldn't actually pay, and washing dishes was not on the cards. Another company swooped in and proceeded to sell or license out MGM's assets to pay for the deal. Part of that involved selling TV rights for Bond films very cheaply, despite MGM UA only being co-owners of the Bond franchise, with Bond producer Albert R. Cubby Broccoli's company. To say Cubby Broccoli was pissed off was an understatement.
We've only just scratched the surface.
Unless you're cauliflower, don't fuck with broccoli. Lawyers were deployed, suing everyone in sight, which left Dalton's third film in limbo. Reading the tea leaves, Timothy Dalton elected not to put a down payment on that Caribbean island that he had his eye on, and instead moved on with his career, fairly safe in the belief that his days as James Bond were now behind him, as were all dreams of him becoming King Tim, ruler of the island nation of Daltonia. The lawsuits took a few years to sort out, and work on a new Bond film would start in earnest around 1993. By now it was clear they'd need a new actor in the title role, but changes behind the camera were plenty. Cubby Broccoli's stepson Michael G. Wilson had been working on the Bond films in various capacities from the early 70s, and eventually became executive producer and a script contributor. Cubby's daughter Barbara Broccoli began working on the films starting in PR, and later worked as an assistant director and associate producer. Beginning with GoldenEye, their pair would now produce the Bond films going forward, as by now Albert R. Broccoli had now stepped down from the wearing 9-to-5 daily grind of making James Bond films in exotic locations. Martin Campbell came on board as director, and would prove to be somebody who could balance the action and getting the best out of his actors.
All right, in London, April's a spring month, whereas in St. Petersburg, we're freezing our butts off. Is that close enough for government work?
As we outlined in our Living Daylights video, Pierce Brosnan had almost been Bond in 1987, but had contractual difficulties precluding him from accepting the role. The early 90s saw Brosnan's career in a weird patch, well known yet not big enough to carry a big movie. Then the chance to play Bond came back again, and he would use it as a stepping stone to reach what would be his greatest role ever, appearing in the Mamma Mia cinematic universe.
Numbers were never my strong suit.
Even though he was the preferred choice in 1987, Brosnan wasn't instantly offered the role. Other actors were sounded out, some even being preferred over Brosnan. But in the end, the role he had wanted for so long was finally his. The question was, what would he do with the role now that he had it? And more critically, just how big would his hair get?
The name's Bond. James Bond.
A dam somewhere in the Soviet Union. A black-clad figure with big hair bungee jumps from the top of the dam as a way to break into a secret installation. What? Just go with it. Someone pops up in the toilet.
Forgot to knock.
It's 007, and he's brought along a friend, 006, Alec Trevelyan. Things don't go so well, and Alec is killed by Colonel Urumov. Years later, Bond is taking a drive with a colleague sent to evaluate him when he races along a mountain road against a woman in a Ferrari.
Ksenia Sergeyevna on the top.
On the top?
On the top.
Bond faces off against Xenia Onatopp again at the casino the night before she ends up stealing a stealth helicopter, where it's used to steal something to control GoldenEye, a secret Russian satellite with EMP weapons. Electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear explosion really screws up the electronics, but as I have my Game Boy wrapped in foil and stored in a microwave oven, we should be okay. One GoldenEye weapon is fired by Xenia and her boss, the now General Urumov. Talk about failing upwards, destroying the complex at Severnaya. One survivor missed by Xenia's bloodlust-filled shooting spree, Natalia, tries to find out what happened to her colleague Boris, who it transpires is involved in the theft of GoldenEye. Bond, meanwhile, has been sent to Russia to try and find out how the stolen stealth helicopter ties in with the incident at Severnaya. He gets some info from CIA agent Jack Wade and former rival Zhukovsky before finding out the man he's been looking for is in fact his long-dead best friend Alec Trevelyan. Awkward? Trevelyan wants to avenge his parents and destroy the financial records of London, though honestly he'd probably do more damage to the financial sector by aiming the EMP satellite at a Caribbean tax haven. Natalia and Bond joined forces to take down Trevelyan at his complex in Cuba. He has a complex, all right.
I might as well ask you if all the vodka martinis ever silenced the screams of all the men you've killed. Or if you find forgiveness in the arms of all those willing women. For all the dead ones you failed to protect.
GoldenEye took any and all cultural criticisms lobbed at Bond films over the years and addressed them directly in the film with a nod and a wink.
You know, this sort of behavior could qualify as sexual harassment.
Really? What's the penalty for that?
Someday you have to make good on your innuendos.
Brosnan as Bond takes the criticisms in his stride, ignores Timothy Dalton's serious take and crafts a persona for himself that was basically like a fan, standing between Sean Connery and Roger Moore and trying to get an autograph from both at exactly the same time without letting either know which one was his favourite. Brosnan's Bond, or Brosnand, has a ruthless streak and a lighter touch.
I'm strangling the cat.
While adding a little vulnerability, he does show that he's in pain in between the quips and the killings. In short, Brosnan makes a fine Bond. Isabella Scorupco as Natalia is a computer programmer who is new to the world of high-stakes espionage, yet manages to keep her cool when dealing with male egos.
Stop it! You're like boys with toys.
Scorupco is another example of the Bond woman role leading to not an awful lot afterwards, at least in English-speaking films.
And what rank do you hold with the motor vehicles department, Mr. Bond?
Famke Janssen as Xenia Onatopp is to date a rare example of a woman in a Bond film going on to bigger things.
Wait for your turn.
Janssen's character, basically somebody who gets off on death, comes very close to stealing every scene she's in. Sean Bean, the guy who only ever appears on the cover of the first of something, gives us a Bond series first, an ex-MI6 agent gone rogue, and a 00 to boot. Trevelyan is reasonably likeable despite being an oily villain, but he's played by Sean Bean, so his end shouldn't be surprising to anybody who's ever followed his career. Also, seen Bean? No, I prefer Blackadder.
You've made me a very unhappy man.
Alan Cumming gives us Bond's first evil hacker, Boris.
I am invincible.
An important character, not only because he's great to watch because he's such a shit, but because this is the first time in the Bond film where computers are almost a weapon, and now they look somewhat like the machines people had in their homes at the time.
IBM compatible with 500 meg hard drives, CD-ROM and 14.4 modems.
Impressive, but can it run Crisis? Gottfried John as Urumov is just this side of ruthless, slightly less psychotic than those around him. Joe Don Baker was the final villain of The Living Daylights, and here appears a CIA man, Jack Wade.
Did you check her out?
Head to toe.
He had, of course, co-starred in Martin Campbell's TV thriller Edge of Darkness in the mid-80s.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War.
Judi Dench is the new M, reflecting the fact MI6 had a female head at the time. Dench's M will become much more integrated into the plots of some films, rather than just handing Bond a folder at the start of a movie.
If you think for one moment I don't have the balls to send a man out to die, your instincts are dead wrong. I've no compunction about sending you to your death. but I won't do it on a whim.
Samantha Bond, no relation, I looked it up twice, was a new Moneypenny, not necessarily smitten with Bond as previous Moneypennies had been, though her acerbic innuendo-laden banter with Bond has been kicked up a few notches.
Good night, James. I trust you'll stay on the top of things.
3.
One of the few cast holdovers was Desmond Llewellyn as Q, back again and a little friendlier with this newfangled Bond.
Don't touch that! It's my lunch.
Robbie Coltrane made his first appearance as former rival Zukovsky.
Pretty talented girl.
Irina! Take a hike!
And Minnie Driver appears in a small role as Zukovsky's girlfriend. It's a good cast, even if most of them are bravely putting on different takes on Russian accents.
Better luck next time. Slugheads.
Pierce Brosnan, under Martin Campbell's guidance, really had given the Bond franchise a massive shot in the arm, possibly B12, maybe something stronger. GoldenEye comes across as a confident and exciting start for the new Bond. Of course, with the help of hindsight, we would see Brosnan's later films having a tough time measuring up to the series' new high watermark.
What an unpleasant surprise.
We aim to please.
Bond's traditional home of Pinewood Studios was unavailable, but when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, or in my case, a really nice lemon curd cake. The production took over an old Rolls-Royce factory in Leavesden and turned that into a studio. GoldenEye would be the only Bond movie to film there, but the studio would become the production base for the Harry Potter films after it was bought by Warner Brothers. One element of the film that perhaps didn't come off as expected was the score by Eric Serra. His electronic sound works well in some scenes, particularly the moody scenes in the dam, but during post-production it was noted that there was just something missing, namely the James Bond theme. John Altman was given the job at the last minute to create some more traditional music to cover the gaps, particularly during the film's signature tank chase. The movie's theme, GoldenEye, sung by Tina Turner and written by Bono and Edge from U2, would go on to become one of the few modern classic theme tunes from James Bond films. With the end of the Cold War, some minor filming was undertaken in St. Petersburg, but the bulk of Russian locations were filmed elsewhere. Where? Anywhere. Anywhere they wouldn't need an army of bodyguards just to make a damn movie. The dam jump, the jump off the dam, was filmed in Switzerland. Many Russian exteriors were shot in the UK, that's real Monaco, but the giant dish in Cuba, when it wasn't a model, was filmed at the giant radio telescope at Arecibo in Puerto Rico. It wouldn't be a Bond film without product placement, from fancy watches to a fancy new BMW Roadster car that is barely even in the film. GoldenEye was the source for one of the greatest licensed tie-in products of all time. Nintendo was about to release its new Nintendo 64 games console to take on Sony's then new top-selling PlayStation system. Nintendo managed to snare the license to Bond and gave it to one of its premier developers, UK-based studio Rare, who translated the movie into the then new 3D first-person shooter genre. GoldenEye 007 would be released in 1997 and become the gold standard of how to do a game based on a licensed product. The cartridge would go on to sell 8 million copies and is still lauded as one of the greatest video games of all time. Just the announcement of a re-release decades later got fans so excited there was a spike in Google searches for waterproof chairs. However, like the film, the follow-up games from different developers did not have the same verve or cultural impact. And realistically, like the film, some of the follow-ups were more than a little bit shit.
Yes! I am invincible!
Computers playing an important part of the plot was matched by their increasing use in the making of the film. The title sequence was a mix of computer-generated imagery and composited film elements to create a new style, reminiscent of those sequences created by Maurice Binder on previous films, but updated for a new generation of moviegoers. The film still uses mostly practical effects, including some excellent miniatures from effects legend Derek Meddings, with GoldenEye being the last project he worked on before his death. It's a 1990s film, so characters act as second-year psychology students, analysing each other or themselves just in case we miss the memo.
You don't like me, Bond. You don't like my methods. You think I'm an accountant. A bean counter more interested in my numbers than your instincts.
I did miss the memo, so it is nice to get a refresher every 5 minutes.
For crying out loud, another stiff-ass Brit. Your secret codes and your passwords.
How can you be so cold?
It's what keeps me alive.
James Bond, Her Majesty's loyal terrier, defender of the so-called faith.
The last time I began a conversation where I listed somebody's character flaws to their face, it ended with a bottle smashed over my head. Look, okay, it was a plastic water bottle, but it was half full. Let me tell you, it smarted.
We are having a pleasant drive in the country, and you've got to bring psychology into it.
As a movie with a lot of firsts, GoldenEye also had new writers. Several had a go at a draft of the script, but it was enlivened by the one-liners added by Bruce Fierstein, who managed to sharpen the film's dialogue.
Walther PPK, 7.65mm. Only 3 men I know use such a gun. I believe I've killed 2 of them.
Bond films had often shied away from definitively using MI6 as the organisation Bond worked for, usually just referring to Bond as someone working for the British Secret Service. GoldenEye definitively shows Bond as working for MI6, Britain's intelligence agency dealing with foreign threats. The real SIS building, MI6 headquarters in London, also featured in an establishing shot. The Bond films would go on to show MI6 headquarters bombed more times than Auntie Beryl was on parent-teacher nights. How she ever made principal, I'll never know.
It's Boris' password. He plays word games. It's what I sit on, but I don't take it with me.
Chair.
Like I said.
GoldenEye was the first Bond film I saw in a cinema, and even all these years later, it still holds up as the best Bond film of the 1990s and of Pierce Brosnan's era. It was an actual hit when released in 1995, and reinvigorated a franchise that many had decided was past its prime. Decades later, it's on prime. The best Bond films all have their signature moments, scenes which even casual viewers can recognise from the movie. GoldenEye's dam jump and the tank chase through St. Petersburg, along with the inevitable wait to see how far into the film Sean Bean's character made it, made GoldenEye a memorable film. For the record, Sean Bean's character dies at around the 2-hour 4-minute mark, a fact we will enter into the Necrobeanomicon, or the Book of the Dead Bean. You may not be able to teach an old dog new tricks, but give him a martini, a gun, a girl, an Aston Martin, a couple of villains, some gadgets, exotic locations, some shitty music, fantastic stunts, and a script dripping with cute one-liners, and you have a really fun time.
Bond, come back alive.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
I said I'd be here, huh? Yo, Marine!